Hi guys, what are we going to do today? Today I'm going to do this fun fall project. We're using Roycycled Basket stencil, and I'm also using the beautiful rivets paper on this, and it's on glass, and it's on the back side of glass, so you could use it and actually use it as a food tray. Let's get started.
So the first thing I'm doing is I'm working with this large piece of glass, and this is a fairly thick tempered glass. We're going to be embossing, so when you're embossing on glass, you need to be very careful. If the glass is too thin, it wants to crack, and you want to make sure your glass is not ice cold when you start putting hot heat on it. So I'm using this thick piece of tempered glass, and it came from some shelves from a unit I had, and I found this is a great way to use these. I'm also going to use Roycycled's new basket stencil. I'm going to be filling this with pumpkins. I know I'm going to want to mask off some of these areas because I don't want all of this embossed up here. This is a low-tack tape. You could use any masking tape or anything just to keep it masked off. Okay, so I want this basket at the bottom, so I'm putting it closer to the bottom. I have my Versamark pad, and this is just a watermark ink. It's a very clear, sticky ink. There are different brands of it out there. You're gonna wanna very carefully just press down, bring up, press down, bring up. You want the areas coated, but you don't want it to bleed underneath. So I have to make sure I get all of these areas. So if you have like a pixie spray or a repositionable adhesive spray, you could spray that on the back of your stencil. I'm just carefully just going down and up on here. So it's filling in all the open areas of the stencil. I'm going to remove my stencil. You want to use a very fine embossing powder. And they have extra fine embossing powders that they sell. When I tried to use just regular embossing powder, it's a little thicker, but what happened was you had to keep the heat on there so long that it wanted to break the glass. With the fine, it seemed to emboss much quicker. This is still going to take longer to emboss than if you did it on paper. So I'm going to take this excess and put this on another piece of paper and pour it back into my container. I'm going to tap. I'm going to put this aside real quick and move this. Pour this back in. And any excess I have on here, I'm just going to brush off. And some of it may just blow off. Because anywhere that it is on here, it will emboss. So now I'm going to heat emboss this. It's going to take a little longer on glass than it does paper. So I'm going to start heating the edges. And you'll start to see when it's actually embossing because it'll get very shiny. You want to let this cool before you touch it because you don't want to smear it. And then we're going to move on. So this is cooled down. I'm going to be layering pumpkins in here. That's why I didn't do the back edge. You're probably not going to see that. And I'm going to put this in about right here. The one I put down first is what's going to show in the foreground. And the next ones I put down go further back. Now, I want this pumpkin, I don't want to see these lines going over the basket. So I am just going to lightly mask this off so when I stamp this in here, these bottom lines don't end up in here. So I'm going to use my Versamark again, my watermark ink, and I'm just stamping down onto my stamp. I'm just going to line this up right here, and you can see I'm going the edge of it to the edge of the basket. So when I'm doing embossing, I really need to do each piece at a time. I can't really do it all at once. So once again, I am going to cover this with my extra fine black embossing powder. Brush this off again. I blew the excess off, and I'll take a look to see if I need to brush anymore. The other reason you do each piece at a time is if I started to do another piece, I could mess this up, smearing what's already there. So I feel like I need to heat set each piece as we go. So once again, I am going to heat this up and get this piece embossed. Okay, so this is cooled off. I took my basket stencil and just went underneath and kind of drew, so I made a little bit better of a mask for this one because I'm going to be putting a large pumpkin right here. And this is cooled off enough now that I can actually put my small mask over the pumpkin. And you can always make your own mask by stamping or drawing onto a sheet of paper so it just covers it so you're not getting that embossing ink everywhere else. I'm going to stamp this large pumpkin with my Versamark. And the one thing with this is you can't really see it, so you just have to really just make sure you cover every area. The only way you can really fix a big mistake, like if I had forgotten to stamp a whole area, is that when you pour your embossing powder on, you'll see it's not taking it all. At that point, I usually just take all of it off, clean my project, and then start it over again. So I'm going to carefully line this up, make sure it's not going into the basket anywhere else. Make sure I've got it all pressed down. Okay, let's see how we did. And you can see how it went right there, so it's not going on here and also onto this mask. So once again, I'm going to put my embossing powder over that area. So once again, I am just going to tip this over, lightly tap, and then blow the excess. Pour this back into my container. If there's anything I need to brush out, just a little bit in here. I'm just going to heat emboss this, and then we'll do our next layer. I'm going to let this cool off, and then we're going to add a bit more. Okay, so this is cooled off. So what I'm going to do now is mask both of these. And I'm going to use my big pumpkin again and put him in the back. So I'm putting my Versamark back on this stamp, and I'm going to lay this one here. Carefully lay it down without moving anything. Pick that up, move my mask, and let's get our powder on again. Okay, let's heat emboss this next guy. So this is all cooled off, and I'm going to add my last embossed element. Once again, you just want to make sure you get your watermark ink everywhere on here, and it's hard to tell sometimes because it's clear, so you can't see if it's on there. And I know I'm not using the whole thing, but I want to make sure I get a lot of it covered just in case. I am going to put him in this corner. You don't want to shift your stamp because you'll smear your ink, and then you'll have embossing powder smeared everywhere where the ink is at. Let's do one last piece of embossing here. I'm going to let this cool off, and then we're going to start painting it. So this is cooled down, and now I'm going to paint these elements in. So what is facing me is the embossed side. And so it's actually the back side, because this is actually going to be our front side when we're done. So I'm going to paint in the elements. You need a nice heavy coverage, so I might have to do a couple coats. So I'll start, and I'm going to do brown in the center of here, and I don't mind that it's kind of thick. And fill this in. And when it starts drying, I look at the other side, and you can see where you need to add more paint. I'm going to do my pumpkin stems real quick with brown. I'm going to start with my sunflower. So all I'm doing is coloring in between the embossed parts. Like I don't want to color in here because that's an opening, that's part of the background. And even if I go over the embossing parts, that's not going to matter because all you're going to see is the black line. So you don't have to be quite as careful painting this in. But you will notice on the other side, if you've missed a spot, you'll definitely see it. So take a look so you can see where we're at now. So I'm going to keep painting. So I did a second coat over this. I'm going to start my orange pumpkins now. So after your first coat dries, look at the other side and you can decide if you need another coat. So after I finish this, we're gonna do the basket, and I kind of just mixed several different browns to get the brown I wanted. You could make your basket whatever color you would like. Basket now. So some of these little open dots and specks where the embossing is, I'm covering that in brown because otherwise it'll look clear behind. But if I didn't paint it, what you're going to see is whatever paper I put behind there is what's going to show. We're going to let this dry and we're going to look at it and decide what we need to do next. This is dry, so I'm going to seal just where I have painted. Light colors first. I'm just going over the spots, and I can take off if I get it on the glass. And then I'm going to let it dry, and then we'll do our last step. Okay, so this is dry. So I've got my decoupage paper, and this is the rivets. And I'm going to turn this over and line it up and decide. Give myself a little extra in case it shimmies around. So I think this is the way I'm going to do it. I really wanted some of the interest of this right here and then something down in here. So I think this is going to work well. And the blues go well with the gold, and it's not blending in too much. So this is the Roycycled Rivets paper. I'm going to cut a little bigger. Okay, so this is what we are going to do. I'm going to kind of make a little bit of a crease here so I know where I'm going, because I'm going to be turning this over. So I tried to just use a damp cloth and some Windex to clean up the smudges on the backside where I had been working. There's still a few on the front, but I'll clean those when we're all done. So I'm going to turn this little guy over, and I kind of see some of my crease lines here. I am going to use my decoupage medium, and you can use whatever you would like. This is between like a Mod Podge and a gel medium. This will dry clear, and so I'm just going to start at one edge and put this down. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. That's what's fun with a background. So I'm just going to keep adding my medium on here and just doing sections at a time. And you're going to feel little bits of bumps under here, but that's just because of the embossing in the paint. So I'm going to bring it back again to the seam to make sure everything's covered. I'm going to clip these corners real quick so we don't get any tension on here. So we're going to let this set and dry, and then we are going to sand the edges. So most of this is pretty dry. I'm gonna sand the edges of this. So I'm gonna seal the back now. This is dry and I've sanded all the edges, so I'm just gonna seal this real quick, just to protect this. So we're gonna let this dry and then we'll turn it over. So this is dry, and the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to put this piece of craft paper over the back to protect all of this. I'm gonna use my Type Bomb, but I'm also gonna use my decoupage medium. I really want it to hold well, so I'm going to squirt this around, and then it grabs a lot quicker. Then on my brush, I'm just gonna take my decoupage medium and spread this. And the back is gonna be a little bumpy anyway because you have all the thick paint, you have the embossing, and then you have your paper. So you're gonna have, it's not gonna be perfectly smooth on the back. So I'm really doing this just to protect all your layers that we put on there. I'm gonna clip these corners so it doesn't start to buckle. And it will wrinkle up a little bit. So I'm just gonna take my iron. I don't want this on here very long. Real heavy craft paper. Just smooth out some of these bubbles. I'm gonna let this dry and I'm gonna sand these edges.
So I hope you thought this video was interesting and it gave you a few new ideas and a few different ways to look at things. So we used the basket stencil, we had used some stamps, the beautiful rivets paper, and some paint. The nice thing about this is if you didn't want to paint the basket, you could actually have put a different decoupage paper just behind the basket also. And the fun thing having it all in glass is you can just wipe it off, put food, put anything on it that you would like, and you can even put feet on the bottom of this to use as a tray. Well, I hope this gives you a lot of fun ideas and things to think about. I hope you give it a try, but whatever you do, have fun.